they're going to overrule Roe versus Wade, and I agree with you. I think that very few people on the pro-choice side are going to accept that as a valid decision. But I'll go furthermore. I don't think the opposition is going to stop there. They're going to try to prevent abortions in every single state. They're going to abolish birth control and they're going to abolish abortion.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the California Dream. My name is Darren Brown, and today we have the second half of my interview with Hannah Miyamoto about recent developments concerning the Supreme Court and what that means for us in California. So if you haven't listened to the first half of the interview released last week, you should probably go listen to that first because it will really put this second half into proper context. Now, since the time I released the first half of this interview, we have seen the invasion of Ukraine by Russian forces. I was going to talk about this on the weekly update Saturday, but I think I need a bit more time to collect my thoughts. And really, the situation is evolving so quickly from day to day, even hour to hour, that whatever comments I make at this moment might not be entirely relevant very shortly. So I'm going to hold off until next week on those comments. I think by next weekend, events will be more clear. We should have a much better idea of what has actually transpired. Of course, it goes without saying that we all hope for as quick a resolution as possible to this conflict in a way that minimizes the violence and human suffering. Of course. But I will wait until next week to comment in more detail. So, having said that, please enjoy the remainder of the interview. Yeah, so we talked about the shadow docket in this Alabama gerrymandering case. There's also the Texas abortion case, the SB 8. You want to say some words about that? What the similarities are in terms of the issues that we're talking about?
Well, the first is, of course, once again, it's a reversal by the U.S. Supreme Court of a lower court injunction against a law that was successfully challenged at the federal court at the district court level. That's the problem, and once again, a belief that it wasn't a 9-0 decision or even 8-1 or 7-2 decision. It was a close case, and there were plenty of justices who did not want to reverse that decision. But if you're ready to sort of wind up on that, I think that law is absolutely terrible as far as Californians are concerned, and I'm personally very concerned, particularly because and this hasn't been covered, and I haven't yet seen anyone really notice this, but because I don't think anyone's quite realized it. But we're waiting for a decision by the U.S. Supreme Court on that SB 8. And if they were to rule in the favor of Texas, then it would mean that a person like you or I in California would be breaking Texas law if we were to make a donation to aid a woman to get an abortion, abortion payment, abortion fund. There are charities that help women get abortions, and we would be breaking the law in Texas if we donated to that. And that's unbelievable because under our U.S. Constitution, if you break a law, now I'm talking about we're just sitting here, right here at my desk, and I click, I send PayPal some money. I have now suddenly violated Texas law, and now Texas has the ability to demand my extradition by the state of California to turn me over for criminal prosecution in a state where um, all I've done is donate money from my own desk in California. I think people should be very concerned about that. And I personally intend to challenge that. And I tend to use it because I think it's the perfect hard case to argue that, because I don't really see a way, if the Supreme Court rules that SB 8 is valid all the way across the board, I don't see another way to stop it, to stop Texas from using the law this way, to effectively, uh, to effectively prevent uh, donations for an activity that's supposed to be constitutionally protected. I don't see another way except to argue that California is not a state. Is not a state because California was invaded in 1846, which may be crazy, but again, if there were an easier, I look to me like this is the hard case. That this is the one shot we got to say, I don't have any other way to win except, Judge, why don't you rule that California is not a state? And why? Because if you do, Texas is in a double bind. Because if they rule that you're wrong, well, first thing, then they can't rule that you're wrong because full faith and credit applies on both sides. So any decision you make in California has to be accepted by the Texas court system. And if they say you're right, then they can't prosecute me because I'm outside the United States of America. By the way, anyone thinks that's insane, don't forget, it just would make me an American citizen living abroad. It would not end my citizenship in the United States of America. It would only end California's membership in the United States of America.
Could they appeal that decision?
Sure, they could. Although that's where it would get interesting because it would have to go all the way to the Supreme Court of California. And then you'd have the ultimate question. How would, if the, right? I mean, if the, what validity would the U.S. Supreme Court decision have on the Supreme Court of California if the California is not in the United States of America? Catch 22.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I'd hope that would also rile a lot of people up into agreeing with me that this is the best course of action. To declare that California is not part of the United States of America, that it was illegally attacked, that the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo does not apply to California because Californians were never a party to that decision, and on and on and on. I got a lot of arguments to make, but it's like I'm very skillfully. Did I say skillfully? Yeah, I'm careful. I said didn't I say I'm not? I might be more radical than Amy Goodman. I said I might be more radical than Amy Goodman because I look for a hard case. I look for a case that I can't win except by getting that argument made. That's the case. So we'll see. That case and the other case that bothers me a lot is the U.S. Supreme Court case decision when they come out decision about whether states can regulate guns. That's a New York case, but California has strict gun laws as well, and it's possible that Supreme Court, again, back to the politics again, that their political bias will cause them to rule that states don't have the right to regulate gun ownership. Although I have a different approach in that case. I don't tend to. That's not the case about arguing about. Well, I could throw that in there. I have a bit of a history in that when I was a law clerk before I even became a lawyer. I found a state statute which it involved nuclear energy, nuclear waste, and I won't get into all the details, but I will tell you that I argued and I argued and I argued and I got the lawyers. Well, I argued it twice. First time they said no, it doesn't apply. Second time I wrote them another memo and I said no, you really got to look at this. And they threw it in, right? Like, okay, we'll make Hannah shut up. They threw it in there, couldn't hurt, right? What happened was we lost, our side being the anti-nuclear side. We lost on every single point except the one that I raised. So there are advantages to what we call kitchen sink arguments. Because sometimes it's the kitchen sink that wins you the case.
So, kind of backing up a little bit, again, I'm not a lawyer. So, my approach to this is, as just an ordinary person who, reads up on this stuff and tries to learn as much as I can. But my overall impression is that there's a real crisis of confidence in the Supreme Court in particular, but I think the federal courts more generally, in that people are seeing them as politically motivated. And, we haven't even discussed the fact that the Supreme Court has a number of justices on it that were nominated by presidents that lost the popular vote
Mm-hmm.
and then confirmed by a Senate that represented a minority of the population. So
That's
you
right.
have this Supreme Court that's really minoritarian, that came to be through the president and the Senate, that were not representing the majority. And then on top of that, they're handing down these rulings on major issues that go against what the majority of the American people want. And I just see that a lot of people are just not going to accept it. They're just not going to accept that this is a valid process overall.
Yeah, and I might go furthermore because we're not talking about individual rights. We are talking about we're talking about state governments. We're talking about they're ruling in favor of institutions that have all the powers of states. Uh, I think that's another factor. But I think you're absolutely right. If the Supreme Court were to certainly if there's a lot of talk they're just going to overrule Roe versus Wade, for instance, and or basically declare that um, you know they're going to overrule Roe versus Wade, and I agree with you. I think that very few people on the pro-choice side are going to accept that as a valid decision. But I'll go furthermore. I don't think the opposition is going to stop there. They're going to try to prevent abortions in every single state. They're going to abolish birth control and they're going to abolish abortion.
I've said the same thing on my show a couple of times, that people think that they're just going to stop with Roe, and I try to tell them, like, look, I'm familiar with this movement. Like, I've been following it for a while. They're fanatics. They're not going to stop at one victory. And my prediction is that if they were to take both houses of Congress and the presidency in a certain election year, and they have all three of those, they're going to grab that chance, and they're just going to pass a federal law that just bans abortion.
Or what about this? What about making an argument in the Supreme Court, in the federal courts, that abortion stills a human heart and blah blah. Would that decision be would that decision be entitled to any respect? Would anyone believe that was would anyone the pro-choice agree with that? Say, oh, no, it looks totally political, and of course, it would be impossible to overturn. That's the other thing. Remember, it's not like you can just go and we just vote. We'll just go back and vote because like you just said, for all practical purposes, you're not going to get a majority on the Supreme Court. Uh, you won't get it reversed. So they'll ban abortion. They'll ban birth control if they can, and I think that's very obvious, and they will do it without any regard for the rights or of the state of people of California and our opinions on the matter. Uh, Another thing that's going to happen is going to be a real problem. And by the way, I should probably point out that I wrote an article, and maybe we'll even put it in a link to the description or something like that. I'll give you the link because it's up, and I think it's still up there, where I was comparing what's going on with abortion to the run up to the Civil War, and where uh, violence was breaking out all over the place, and why? Because the slavery, let's call them slave states, the slave states used their federal power, their power in Congress, to get a law passed called the Fugitive Slave Act. And what it effectively did was it required everyone in the United States of America to turn over any escaped slave. If you didn't, you would have someone comes to you saying, "I'm an escaped slave," and if you were to help them hide out from the authorities or push them into Canada or whatever, you faced up to a $10,000 fine. It was years in prison. It was draconian. In 1853, a situation like this broke out in Pennsylvania. It led to a gun battle, and they actually charged two white men with, I kid you not, treason against the United States. And by the way, you ever see that movie Lincoln? In that movie Lincoln, we all remember the role played by Tommy Lee Jones. He had a big role in that movie. Right? He played Thaddeus Stevens. Thaddeus Stevens, while he was U.S. Congressman, defended Mr. Traitor, right? Mr. Treason, and won. He got the jury to basically nullify federal law, and that's exactly the way it was seen in the South. By the way, that Pennsylvania jury had done a terrible injustice to their rights, and and you bet, what they did in a couple years later? They started forming militias. This is the reason why the Civil War broke out as fast as it did, because the Southerners were darn ready to start shooting as soon as Lincoln. They were getting ready to start shooting years before the Civil War started. Anyways, I pointed out that what's going to happen. States have already passed laws where they're saying if you help someone leave the state to get an abortion in another state, that's a crime. Or the example I give in my article, I'm saying, let's say a woman leaves an anti-abortion state, uh, and and say comes to California, and okay, and gets her abortion, and then she doesn't go back because, after all, she could get arrested. At what point does she no longer become a citizen of that state, right? And who's responsible for helping her? Is Greyhound is Greyhound or the airline responsible because they're the ones who sold her the ticket, or is the person who lent them? You know what I mean? You know, where does And what about your family? Let's say you have a family in California. Are they all Are they all criminally liable now because they helped this woman leave an anti-abortion state to get an abortion in their state and permanently reside in California? I'd like to know. So I think that's where uh, we have a history. We know where that leads. It's not good. It is not peaceful. It is violent. And I'm not threatening violence, but I'm letting people know right now that that's where we're headed if we don't start respecting other people's rights.
Yes, this is something that I've thought about specifically. I mean, there's many different issues where I see California and the United States coming into conflict, but the abortion issue or reproductive rights is one that I don't know how these things eventually come to a head. I mean, there has to be some kind of point where somebody gives. I mean, so let's say that they do pass a law that outlaws abortion, or there's some Supreme Court ruling, and let's say that the governor of California basically says we're just going to ignore this ruling.
Mm-hmm.
We're just going to
Mm-hmm.
nullify it, because he would
Right.
completely have the political backing of the overwhelming majority of Californians, and he would be able to do that.
Exactly. In some circumstances, he might be politically pressured
He
into it.
would be pressured, if, or she would be pressured, um, if they didn't. So then, okay. So then we say, we just ignore this ruling. Then it comes down to, well, okay, do the people who are very opposed to abortion outside California, do they put pressure on the federal government to do, I don't know, something like federal troops? I mean, I'm looking at situations that come
Federal
down to, like,
marshals, I think, but that's exactly right. I mean,
I mean, but I'm looking at things like the school desegregation, where Eisenhower sent,
right?
troops down to the South. I mean, is that the kind of situation that we're looking for, where it's like, whose monopoly on violence is going to win out?
Hmm.
Am I being dramatic, or am I?
I
Um,
don't think so at all. I think that you you start reaching for all the arguments that have been made by Southerners, particularly like interposition. I should probably point out to you that we're not so far away, because I might remind you that Governor Newsom has made very clear that the state of California, in fact, he's even put money in the budgets and things like that to aid providing abortions for women from other states, and that was passed, with without opposition, basically, or without effective opposition. Very little concern about it. Talk about it. So he's made it very clear that if Roe versus Wade is repealed, California will step right up, and the full resources of the state will be available to defend reproductive rights. And it's not too. Yeah, we don't know, but I think maybe we should maybe bring this back to full circle. Isn't it the
sure.
responsibility of the courts, especially the Supreme Court of the United States, to prevent the country from becoming such a tinderbox? I mean, where when you're a federal judge, when you're the Supreme Court, you're on the Supreme Court, and you take on the responsibility as that. Isn't somewhere in there supposed to be ultimately I'm for the USA? I think so. And I talked earlier, didn't I? I talked about the importance of maintaining confidence in the Supreme Court of the United States, as well as because it's actually integral to having confidence in the U.S. government at all. But yeah, I think that's as I said, yeah, the word I used was tinderbox. Is it not the responsibility? The In my article, I pointed out Dred Scott. That's Dred Scott versus Sanford. Most people don't know anything about Dred Scott versus Sanford, but you can understand it. Maybe one thing to understand it this way: that was a decision in 1858, 18. I'm sorry, 18. Yeah, 1858, 1858, in which the U.S. Supreme Court, led by Chief Justice Taney, who was a Democratic judge, by the way, who was appointed by the pro-slavery side. He basically thought, I'm going to settle the issue of slavery once and for all in the United States of America. And I'm going to do it by persuading this court to agree with me, such things like a black man has no rights that a white man is bound to respect. That the Constitution of the United States is a white supremacy constitution. It's there to make keep that white people are superior to every other race in this country, in this world. Basically, that's basically what it says. It's an extraordinary. I've never read the thing. I've tried to read it. It's 100 pages long in the old books, but it's a doozy. It it is you ask most lawyers, they will tell you, and most judges will tell you that Dred Scott v. Sanford is one of the worst decisions ever made by the U.S. Supreme Court. Not just because of it, it basically made the Civil War inevitable. That's bad. That should be pretty bad. Causing basically starting the most devastating war in American history, but also because it could have been avoided. It was so easy to kick that case out because number one, the evidence was there that it was collusion. The slave and the slave owner. Well, the slave owner had given the slave the money to bring this case and had funded the whole case in the first place because the slave owner, quote unquote, was opposed to slavery. So it was collusion. They could have kicked it out right there. Um, but no, because Taney, he knew best, Boy, he was going to settle this issue, this thorny issue that had torn this United States of America since the Constitution itself had been enacted, right? He was going to fix this. What a brilliant man. And what he did was, as I just said, what he did was he convinced Northern people that not only were they going to have to be the workers, the unpaid servants of slave owners, no matter what your opinion of slavery was, but there would be no possible change, not even the legislative change, not even a federal law could outlaw slavery. That's what Dred Scott versus Sanford really did. And so essentially, it didn't start Northerners, but it certainly made people think that, well, there were anti-slavery people, in fact, who called for secession of the northern states because after Dred versus Scott. So it had everybody talking about secession. And hey, isn't that sort of like now that, to think that we might only be 3 years away from a breakup of the United States, like having an 1861. Not because of anything that you and I did, but because of people in power who thought they could resolve a controversial issue without resorting to, without having any recognition of public opinion, which is really what it's about. Because let's not forget, if they'd brought slavery to a popular vote in 1860, which they did in a way, because Abraham Lincoln became president.
That's what the election was about.
Right? American people, more than 30-some states, didn't have slavery, including California, by the way. I want to point that out. We had a constitution that specifically prohibited slavery in California. But again, back to Taney. Taney said, "I don't care what the majority opinion is. I'm going to rule that it's unconstitutional to outlaw slavery." Basically, that's what he did. And so we had a war.
I think this is a good point to kind of wrap up because it ties into the last point that I was going to make to see what you had to say about. And that is kind of at this 30,000 foot level. We've talked about some of the problems with the Supreme Court and the kind of crisis and confidence in that. But to my thinking, what the real problem is that what the Republicans and the conservative movement more generally seem to have figured out is how to be able to leverage every conceivable anti-democratic mechanism and procedure in all the three branches of the federal government as well as the state governments. And they seem to kind of be bootstrapping all of these in this kind of reinforcing vicious cycle where like leveraging one mechanism here weakens the democratic protections over there, and then they're able to leverage that newly weakened branch to further weaken the original one or some other branch over here, and it just kind of continues and continues, just eroding whatever ability we have to stop this takeover within the existing institutions.
But I will point out, it's not a random thing. We're seeing history repeat itself. You can almost every time you see one of these objectionable laws or cases being brought, you can see that they're just simply following an old path. For instance, what was the first step? For instance, what was the first step to the separate but equal doctrine? and racial segregation? Answer: prevent African American people and white liberals from voting in elections. They Southerners used pro-slavery Southerners used amazing phrases like "redeemer." They said they redeemed the South. Redeemed it from what? Redeemed it from the dishonor of treason against the United States of America? Redeem it from the dishonor of losing the Civil War? I don't know. But they claimed they'd redeemed the South because they'd made sure that black people didn't vote and white liberals didn't vote. That fear their lives, of course, by terror. I mean, the greatest example of domestic terror in American history is the rise of Ku Klux Klan. So, and the also opposition to a federal anti-lynching law, which went on a long time. Another one, attacking public schools. Uh, when Brown versus Board of Education was passed, states tried all kinds of things: voucher programs, closing federal public schools completely. You look at a lot of private schools in the South, and you go back in history, and you'll find out they came straight out of the white citizens councils, and this idea that they were going to make sure that white kids didn't go to school with black kids. I'm not saying that private schools in the South are operating under the same principle, but that's where they were founded. And I could go on, but the point is yeah, preventing voting, I think, is absolutely vital, because that was the first step in disenfranchising the African American. Was the first step into into segregation, into violence, into lynch law, and ultimately into migration of the African Americans from the South. Let's not forget. I will conclude, but I recall in our history books about reading about how African American entire villages would just get on the train and go north. And there are stories of them coming across. The conductor would say that we've crossed the Ohio River, and the whole carriage would just rise up singing, with talking about having crossed over the Jordan and into the Promised Land, and on, and etc. I don't think we want to go back to that time, but are we? You know, I think that we got to be wide awake, as they say. We got to be wide awake. What's going on? I'm not a I'm talking. I'm a Catholic, but I'm talking like a Protestant. Oh my gosh, Father Coughlin, forgive me.
In my last show, I said the way that I put it was that this conservative movement really wants to take the country back to the 1880s.
Oh no, they want to take it back to the 1850s.
Well, I said they would like to take it back to the 1850s, but I don't know if they think they can. I mean, can they go back before the Civil War?
Well, it comes down to who's going to enforce the laws ultimately. Let's not forget. I mean, the black codes were passed 1866, 1867, 1868. You had debt peonage. There were a heck of the chain gang, arresting African Americans for minor offenses and forcing them to commit unpaid labor for for private individuals. I mean, there were a heck of a lot of ways to restore slavery in the South. Uh, it's amazing, frankly. I almost want to take my hat off to the amazing genius of the white Southerners for thinking of ways to go around the Constitution. And ultimately, the courts stayed silent.
So, I mean, these are things that we need to think about. I think a lot of people in California I don't think they realize how determined they are, that they just can't conceive that this is the direction that they want to go. Like, something like, say, child labor laws. I think they would, in a heartbeat, they would do away with child labor laws and just say, yeah, it's fine for 13, 14-year-olds to be working somewhere,
or 12 or 8 years old.
or yeah. And it's hard, I think, for people in California to wrap their minds around that's something that's staring us in down the line if we don't do something about this.
And well, let's not forget the force. What's really driving? Well, a lot of it's driving. A lot of it's religious zealotry. The conservatives believe that they're so right, not just because of sheer will in some Nietzschean sense, but in a sense that it's in the Bible. You know, but again, back to our history books. There were in the 1950s. There were plenty of people who would insist to you that slavery was endorsed in the Bible. That it was unchristian to be opposed to or racial segregation. The Loving case is a good example of that one. 1967, the interracial marriage case, which by the way was a 9-0 decision by the United States Supreme Court, that said that states could not prevent people of different races from marrying, but the lower court, the state court in Virginia, the judge went on and just got on his soapbox and insisted that the Bible was, and it was the will of God and all the rest. And, and and what can you do? We're going back to it now. People are saying, "Well, that's silly. No judge would just insist on the Bible being the law." Well, how are you going to stop them? That's all I want to know. What are you going to do if they say it? That's what it is. Are you just going to sit there and say, "Well, that's what the law says. I guess that's what the law says"? What gives some what? Some donkey being led around by a rope around its neck? Uh, I think there's a point when we got to say, "I know it's right and I know it's wrong, and that's wrong." I'm sorry. It's. I hope that's. I think that is. I mean, uh, let's not forget the Holocaust was lawful under German law. Didn't violate a single law in Germany. And what do we do to those people? We hung them.
There are a lot of other things that I would like to talk about maybe some other day, but we've gone on for a while. Are there any closing thoughts you want to leave people with? What's the kind of the last kind of thought you want people to have in their mind when they're thinking about these things as we close?
Oh, I think you've really covered it. That we, well, there's a lot of our, a lot. I mean, there's been a lot of people who have studied the 1930s, for instance, in Germany and stuff like that, and we know that uh, a lot of evil got committed in the 1930s and 40s, specifically because people insisted on following the law without questioning the justice of that law or how that law was created. What process? Was it fair? Was it democratic, ultimately? Was violence used uh, without repercussions? All these factors should have been considered because I think we know, although that it was around 1944 that the Germans realized that Adolf Hitler was a bad chancellor, but by then it was too late. And in 1945, if you didn't, if you weren't prepared to die for the Nazi Party, well, then they'd shoot you or hang you. So it was, I think that a lot of good Germans. We don't want to be good Germans. I think that I would probably encourage people to say that if you feel different about that opinion, or if you think that I'm a danger to my ideas are a danger to good order, please make your comments. We'll bring them before, but I should probably point out that I have studied public international law and human rights law. I've studied the Nuremberg trials. I could speak about that at length. And as lawyers, we ultimately ask that question. We Darren, we have this question about what is law, because on the one hand we talk about positive law, and that's what's ever in the book. Whatever the law book says, that's what the positive law is. And then we talk about what is law, and is it the will of the population? Is it custom? And we debate it about all the time. And what is the role of morality in law? And so, I mean, I should point out that, most of us think that murder is wrong, but recently there was a law introduced that would have basically declared anybody who got shot by somebody else and killed, it was a justified homicide, and that the state had to prove that it wasn't justified, completely flipping over the burden. And it was justly called the right to murder law. So, and you think to yourself, well, that's insane, to say that you just assume that the man who's still holding the gun and alive is the victim. Uh, is the innocent person. That's just insane. And the worst of all is, there's no way I believe that law would ever be enforced in a non-racially discriminatory way. I don't believe that in a second. It just uh, so they literally wanted to pass a law that would have made murder legal, uh, and most of us would say that's immoral. Most of us would agree. We go down the street. Is murder immoral? And they would probably would say no, yes, and they might, of course, cite the Fifth Commandment, but they might also, if you say, what about the beyond the Fifth Commandment? They say it's still immoral. I don't know where. Preservation of human life, something, but somewhere along the lines, no, taking the life of another person, without justification would be immoral, and you can't legalize that.
Where can people find out more about your writing or organizations? Is there any place you would direct people to?
I don't have an organization, frankly. If you and my work in filmmaking is on things like California High Speed Rail. I'm on YouTube under Pacifico Studios, so you can go Google that and like and subscribe and comment and all the rest. But right this minute, I shouldn't joke about it. Right this minute, I have nothing, because I'm working on uh, on a documentary about high speed rail called Day One. California enters the age of high speed trains, which I think is going to be really exciting because it's going to uh, present. Well, for one thing, if you didn't know, you'll learn about how many trains we already have in California, and you'll learn about basically what's it going to be like to ride trains, which probably will be as soon as 2029, in 7 years. You should be able to buy a ticket and ride the high speed train. And even though, yes, it's not going to go from Merced to Bakersfield, but you will be able to go from San Francisco and to LA or wherever. And so from anywhere from Northern California to a lot of places in Southern California, and ride this high speed train, and it's going to make your journey quicker, faster, and in fact, be competitive with flying. And that's a major step. So that's what it's going to be about. That's what I'm kind of working on. But I'm really glad you gave me the opportunity to talk about legal issues. And also, I should point out that even though I'm not a practicing attorney, I still feel an ethical obligation to educate the public about the law, about the evolution of the law, the development of the law, the principles of it. Because ultimately, the best laws are the ones that people follow because they believe that they're the right rule. That's the ultimate law should not be enforced by anybody. I mean, the ideal laws, only bad people should have to be forced to follow the law, and most of us should just say, well, "That's a good idea." Yeah, yes, I should have smoke alarms in my house, for instance, or something like that. I should license my car, you know. I shouldn't require a police officer to write me up to follow the law. That's what the law should be about. The law should only really be enforced on bad people who don't follow the law, and most of us don't. And that's why I always would remind that people in law. I remember in law school I used to say that to say people that most people don't realize. They think they're following the law because a police officer is going to arrest them. No, most of us follow the law because it's the law, because we agree with the law, and if we don't agree with the law, we agree with the democracy that passed the law. And I think that's a real good place to end right there.
Thanks again for stopping by. And hopefully we'll talk again soon sometime.
Anytime I'm available. Take care.
Okay, great.
Bye bye,
Thanks.
everybody.